Imagine being only 15 years old and finding a way into NASA's computers. At that age, most teenagers are worried about school, friends, or maybe video games. But Jonathan James was different. He wasn't just playing around with a computer. He was about to outsmart one of the most powerful space agencies in the world. This story is not science fiction. It is a real event that shocked the United States and caught the attention of the FBI. A teenager, sitting in his room, managed to break through layers of security that were meant to protect top-secret information. He was young, curious, and bold, and his actions would make him famous, but also bring him into serious trouble. The name of this teenager was Jonathan James, also known online as Cybercrime, and his story is one of both genius and tragedy. Before we go into the details, let's start from the very beginning. Who was Jonathan James, and how did a kid his age even get close to hacking NASA? Jonathan Joseph James was born in South Florida in 1983. On the outside, he looked like a regular kid. He went to school, hung out with friends, and lived a normal teenage life. But behind that normal image was a young mind that was far from ordinary. From a very early age, Jonathan was fascinated by computers. While other kids were busy playing games, he was curious about how those games worked, how the internet worked, and how computer systems connected with each other. Jonathan's parents later described him as very intelligent, but also very independent. He loved to figure things out on his own. When he faced a problem, instead of asking for help, he dug deeper until he found the answer himself. This mindset would later push him into exploring areas most people wouldn't dare to touch, like government networks and NASA systems. During the late 1990s, computer hacking had a certain culture around it. The internet was still new, security was not as strong as it is today, and young hackers felt like pioneers exploring an open world. For many of them, it wasn't about money or crime. It was about curiosity, adventure, and proving their skills. Jonathan was part of that culture. He didn't see himself as a criminal. He saw himself as someone testing limits, seeing how far his talent could take him. Online, Jonathan went by the name Cybercrime. This name soon became known in underground hacking circles. He was skilled, clever, and bold enough to go after big targets. What made him stand out wasn't just his ability to hack systems, but his courage to go after some of the most secure networks in the world. But Jonathan was still a teenager. He was only 15 when he carried out his most famous hack. At an age when most kids are worried about passing exams, Jonathan was breaking into NASA's computers. It was the kind of act that no one expected from a boy his age, and it would forever change his life. In the year 1999, Jonathan James made history. At just 15 years old, he managed to do something that shocked the entire world. Sitting in his bedroom, with nothing more than a computer and his skills, he broke into NASA's computer systems. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a lucky guess. Jonathan carefully planned his way in, step by step, until he reached one of the most secure networks in the world. What did he find inside? Not just random files or harmless data. Jonathan gained access to something very important. He downloaded software from NASA's computers that controlled life support systems on the International Space Station. This software wasn't small. It had about $1.7 million worth of code. Imagine the responsibility. This was the very code that made sure astronauts could breathe safely in space. And now, it was sitting on the computer of a 15-year-old boy. But that was not all. Jonathan also broke into computers belonging to the Department of Defense. He managed to intercept thousands of private messages, including emails between government employees. By doing this, he showed just how weak even the strongest security systems could be when faced with a determined hacker. The impact was serious. NASA had to shut down their systems for 3 whole weeks to check and fix the damage. This shutdown cost them over $40,000. Engineers had to work day and night to make sure their systems were safe again. For an agency like NASA, which deals with space missions and astronaut safety, this was more than just a technical problem. It was a national security issue. Jonathan later explained that he didn't do it for money or for fame. He was simply curious. He wanted to know how things worked, and hacking was his way of exploring. But no matter what his reason was, the world now knew his name. A 15-year-old had outsmarted one of the most powerful organizations on Earth. And NASA, embarrassed and alarmed, had no choice but to call on the FBI. Jonathan's hack didn't stay secret for long. When NASA and the Department of Defense realized that their systems had been broken into, alarms went off at the highest levels of government. This wasn't just a small computer problem. It was treated as a national security breach. The FBI was quickly called in to investigate. For weeks, agents traced the digital fingerprints left behind by the hacker. Every email intercepted, every piece of stolen code, every connection log was studied. Slowly, the trail began to point back to a teenager in South Florida. It seemed unbelievable to them at first. How could a 15-year-old, with no formal training, manage to sneak past the defenses of two of the most secure agencies in the world? But the evidence kept leading to one person, Jonathan James, the boy who called himself C0MRAID. One morning, Jonathan's quiet teenage life was shattered. FBI agents showed up at his house with a search warrant. Computers, disks, and any piece of technology he owned were taken away. For Jonathan, it was no longer just a game or an adventure. It had become real, and now the U.S. government was knocking at his door. He was arrested and charged with cybercrime. And although he was only 15 years old, the seriousness of his actions meant he couldn't escape punishment. Jonathan James became the first American juvenile to be jailed for computer crimes. He was sentenced to 6 months of house arrest, probation until he turned 18, and was banned from using recreational computers. Later, after violating his probation, he served time in juvenile detention. The case made headlines across the country. Newspapers and TV channels reported about the boy who hacked NASA. Some people saw him as a prodigy, a genius kid who exposed the flaws in America's security. Others saw him as a dangerous criminal who needed to be punished. For Jonathan, the fame was not glamorous. He had lost his freedom, his privacy, and his future opportunities. The government would allow. After serving his sentence, Jonathan James tried to return to a normal life. But for someone who had once hacked into NASA and the Department of Defense, nothing could ever be truly normal again. His name was already written into history as the first juvenile ever punished for cybercrime in the United States. That label would follow him everywhere. Jonathan was still just a teenager, but the punishment he faced left deep marks. He was no longer free to use computers the way he once had. His probation meant constant restrictions. Every online movie made was under suspicion. The curiosity that had once made him explore systems and networks now became a heavy burden. He felt like he was living under a microscope, watched and judged for every action. The hacking community still admired him. Many young hackers looked up to C0MRAID as a legend, a kid who had managed to do what grown experts could not. But admiration from outsiders didn't erase the struggles in his personal life. His family worried about him. His opportunities for education and jobs were limited. Employers and schools often saw him as a risk. Jonathan himself admitted that the hacking episode changed the way people looked at him forever. He wanted to move forward, but the shadow of his past was always there. Even though he tried to live quietly and avoid further trouble, he couldn't escape the feeling of being trapped by the reputation of the boy who hacked NASA. Life after the hack was a mix of constant surveillance, limited freedom, and the pressure of living with a label he never expected to carry. Jonathan James was no longer just a teenager with a talent for computers. He had become a symbol, both of the dangers of hacking and of the government's fight against cybercrime. And for Jonathan, that role came with a weight that he would never fully shake off. By the year 2008, Jonathan James was 24 years old. Nearly a decade had passed since the NASA hack, but he was still remembered as the teenage hacker who broke into some of the most secure systems in the world. Jonathan tried to stay out of trouble, yet his past continued to follow him like a shadow. That year, the FBI began investigating a massive credit card theft case. Several hackers were suspected of stealing millions of customer records from large companies. Even though there was no clear proof that Jonathan was involved, his name came up during the investigation. Because of his history, he became an easy target for suspicion. The FBI raided his home once again. Agents searched through his belongings, looking for evidence. For Jonathan, this was devastating. He believed he was being blamed simply because of his past. In his eyes, the government would never see him as anything other than the boy who hacked NASA. The pressure was unbearable. Jonathan felt cornered, powerless, and hopeless. On May 18, 2008, he took his own life with a gun. He was only 24 years old. In the note he left behind, Jonathan wrote that he had lost faith in the justice system and no longer believed he had a future. His death shocked the hacking community and deeply saddened those who knew him. Some saw it as proof of how harshly young hackers were treated, while others saw it as a tragic reminder of the heavy cost of breaking the law, even out of curiosity. Jonathan James' story, which began with the excitement of a brilliant teenager exploring computers, ended in heartbreak. A life full of potential was cut short, and the world was left to wonder what might have been if his genius had found a different path. Jonathan James' story is more than just the tale of a teenager who hacked NASA. It is a story about curiosity, talent, and how quickly those things can spiral into something much larger than expected. He showed the world that even the most secure systems could be broken, not by a foreign government or a team of experts, but by a boy sitting in his bedroom. In many ways, Jonathan's life became a warning for both sides. For governments and organizations, it revealed how vulnerable their systems were and how much they needed to improve their defenses. For young people interested in hacking, it showed how easily curiosity could turn into crime and how the consequences could be life-changing. But Jonathan's story is also a tragedy. He wasn't a criminal mastermind, nor did he hack for money. He was a gifted kid who loved to explore. Yet the punishment, the constant suspicion, and the weight of his reputation eventually crushed him. His death reminds us that behind the headlines and labels, there was a human being who needed support, guidance, and hope. Today, ethical hackers, people who use their skills to protect systems rather than break them, are celebrated. In another world, Jonathan James might have been one of them. He could have used his talent to strengthen security, to teach, and to inspire. Instead, his life became a cautionary tale about the thin line between genius and destruction, curiosity and crime. Jonathan James will always be remembered as the boy who hacked NASA. But he should also be remembered as a young man whose brilliance burned too quickly and whose story teaches us the importance of second chances, compassion, and using talent for good.